Daryl, we have no video on Zoom.
See, sure enough, good old Good old cat taking care of me. You've all heard of Cat Kennedy, I'm sure. Yes, Cat, thank you so much. I think we've got audio now. I appreciate it, girl. I appreciate it. All right. So they were emboldened. That's the Arab Palestinian people claimed the land, yet it was not theirs to claim. They were emboldened during World War I when a British commander encouraged the Arabs to revolt against the Ottomans so great that Britain could take over the land. The Ottomans had controlled that whole area, Turkey, that whole area, and we'll see maps in a little bit. In 1916, a promise through a series of letters from Britain's McMahon to Hussein, Sheriff of Mecca, promised that if they were successful in driving out the Turks, they would be given the rights to what would later be called Palestine, Transjordan, Syria, and Iraq, 4 areas. They thought they had legitimate hold of the land, but they did not. If Israel is the rightful owners of the land decreed by God Himself, then anyone who has taken possession of the land is to be considered occupier, who over history has occupied the land. Around 700 BC, Israel split into two kingdoms, and the countries of Assyria in the north and later Babylon in the south defeated the Jews and claimed the land. The Jews did return to Jerusalem from exile, but a series of enemies vying for the control of the land ensued. Persia, Greece, and the Roman Empire all claimed victory over Israel. Later, Constantine laid claim, followed by the Byzantines and the Islamic conquerors of 638 AD. At the end of the 1400s, as a result of the Inquisition, the Ottoman Empire took over the Middle East and the great diaspora occurred with Jews scattered around the world. Number 5. What is the Zionist movement of the 19th and 20th centuries, and how did that play a role in heightening the conflict? With Jews living around the globe and most concentrated in Europe, prevailing anti Semitism attitude began to grow. In response, Theodor Herzl founded what would be called the Zionism movement, which claimed that Jews needed to return to the land promised by God through Abraham. This movement grew in Europe and in America. At the same time, that British commissioner, McMahon, had made promises to Palestinians. Lord Arthur Balfour, British Foreign Minister, issued a declaration that a Jewish nation needed to be established back in the land. This Balfour Declaration was accepted by the League of Nations in 1917, adding to the conflict and confusion. Balfour would be officially recognized and not the Hussein McMahon Correspondence, causing even more anger in the people of Palestine. Question 6. How does the Holocaust play a role in all of this? Sadly, Hitler was supposedly influenced by the writings of Martin Luther, the German theologian, who held to the replacement theology. And replacement theology is what I just mentioned. All those believing that Christians have replaced Israel in God's divine plan, so now the whole Bible applies to Christianity. And we as dispensationalists know that's incorrect. But Martin Luther established the Lutheran Church, and I grew up in that garbage. This fed the anti-Semitism doctrine of Hitler. Along with being threatened by the rising Zionist movement, Hitler concluded all Jews must die. Again, God spared the Jews, and when the atrocities of the Holocaust were discovered, great sympathy came forth from the world towards the Jewish people and opened the door wide for them to get back to the land. Question 7. What occurs in 1948 that was so significant, and who is David Ben-Gurion? On May 15, 1948, the United Nations declared that Israel was now an independent Jewish state. Ben-Gurion was the head of the Jewish Agency, facilitating the return of the Jews to the land and was named its first prime minister and asked to form a government. The Palestinians were outraged and felt betrayed by the British. The United Nations partition plan of the land gave Palestinians about 40% of the land of Israel. The Holy Lands, here's a slide picture of the Holy Lands, the Golan Heights, that's Syria across, that they touched there at the Golan Heights. Then we have the West Bank, which across the river is Jordan. And then we have the Suez, or the Gaza Strip, which is adjoined with Egypt and Israel. And of course, separating Egypt from Israel is the Suez Canal, and that goes through there. And the Middle East today, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Let's look at what it looks like today. Now, that's what it looked like back then. So here's a picture of today. Here's what it all looks like today. And remember, God promised in Genesis 15, verse 18, on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. Well, here's the river of Egypt, the Nile River. And there's the river Euphrates coming down through Iraq today. All of that land was promised and given to Israel in those days. Genesis 15:8. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I've given the land from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile River, to the great river, the river Euphrates, that flows down through Iraq today. Right. Next question. Why are Palestinians mostly in the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and West Bank? Well, we can go back and look at pictures, but as we saw back here, let me just flash them in front of you just a moment. So here we see the Syrians and Lebanon. Now that's the Golan Heights, and that's where Hezbollah has been attacking Israel from that area, Lebanon and Syria. And so that Golan Heights area, and we'll read here in just a moment, but that was the area that the Muslims from Syria and Lebanon were allowed to live in that area, but Israel would be governance over that area. All right. And the next one was the West Bank, which is the west bank of the Jordan River, which across the Jordan River is Jordan. And that area, the West Bank, was that area. And notice Jerusalem is right here in that West Bank. And so that was an area too where the Muslims were allowed to be there and live and work, but the Israelites had governance. Israel had governance over that land. And then the third was the Gaza Strip, which is all in the news today. All right. And that was, again, an area. And back in, I forget, we may come to it in the notes here, that when Israel agreed, okay, you can have the Gaza, we'll put out the Gaza Strip. And of course, the moment that happened, if you all recall, the Gaza became a wasteland once Israel moved out of there. And they had their own election. And again, who did they elect as their governing? Hamas. They elected them. Okay. And so back to our questions. Question 8. Why are Palestinians mostly in the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and West Bank? From 1948 until 1967, Israel became very prosperous, resulting in many citizens from Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt came to Israel to take advantage of the prosperity in Israel. What is the two-state solution that we hear about? The United Nations partition plan initially gave Israel a portion of the land and allowed the Arabs, Palestinians to have 3 separate sections, with Jerusalem considered international land. That was those 3 sections I just showed you on the map. Okay. With Israel accepting the agreement and began repopulating their home. The Palestinians rejected the offer, calling it al-Nakba, or the disaster. War between them ensued, but a peace agreement was reached and 750,000 Palestinians tied to Gaza and the West Bank. Since that time, every conflict has been started by the Palestinians, and they ended up losing those conflicts and have to relinquish more land back to Israel. And if you recall back, several presidencies ago, when Yasser Arafat, remember that name? Well, remember when in 1967, if we get to that, we may, I'm not sure if I had it here later, but in 1967, they fought the Six-Day War. And at that time, the Jordanians had dropped flyers in Israel. The Syrians and Lebanese had dropped flyers in Israel. The Egyptians had dropped flyers in Israel to warn the Egyptians who lived in Israel, the Jordanians who lived in Israel, the Syrians and Lebanese who lived in Israel, lived there, worked there, loved living there, had good jobs, drove nice cars. But they were warning them, we're going to attack Israel and wipe them off the map on a certain date, so you need to come home. So, and there were many Jordanians who decided to go home. But guess what? The Muslims in Jordan would not let them in because they'd been living amongst the infidels, according to Islam. So what did they do? They put them in concentration camps. They never let them come in. Well, of course, the world blamed Israel for putting them in concentration camps, when it was actually the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Egyptians who did it to their own people, who'd been living in Israel and had decided if they didn't want to die when the war started, they'd go back home. And that's who Yasser Arafat gathered to develop the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. All right. And we all probably remember that going on too. And so that's how it all started. And the UN partition plan, where the only solution it sees is a two-state solution. There we go. The two-state solution that we hear about, the UN partition plan, or what is it? The UN partition plan initially gave Israel a portion of the land and allowed the Arab Palestinians to have three separate areas. Okay, we did that. War between them ensued, but a peace agreement was reached, and the Palestinians ended up losing those conflicts and having to relinquish more land back to Israel. The two-state solution. There we go. I'll get my slide. Here we go. Number 9. How did the United States play a role in the reestablishing of the state of Israel? The U.S. president at the time of the United Nations Declaration of Israel Independence was Harry Truman. Truman put the full weight of American support behind the Jewish people. Some claim it was a purely political move to appease the Jewish voters in America, yet others conclude that Truman fully understood what the scripture promised. Whoever blesses Israel, I will bless, declares the Lord God. This was a deciding factor. The knowledge of that Old Testament promise had played a major role in U.S. policy in regard to Israel. Question number 10. What role do terrorist organizations play in this conflict, such as PLO, Hamas, and Hezbollah? Like any geopolitical conflict, there are many innocent people who get hurt. The fact is, there are many peaceful Palestinian people living throughout Israel. Nevertheless, there is a deep underlying hatred for Israel throughout the Arab community and the forming of extreme groups focused on the destruction of Israel and controlling the land. These extreme groups, terrorists, infiltrate the Arab people and carry out all kinds of violence to harm the Jews. Sometimes they cause civil disobedience, bombings, hostage taking, and sadly, worse acts of destruction. Each incident is initiated by the Arabs, and Israel must respond. The end result over the decades is that Israel always prevails, and we know why. They will never lose. They strengthen their position in the land and push the Palestinians into secured regions. The outcome just adds to the Arab frustration and increases their bitter jealousy towards the nation of Israel. Now the question, and here it is, what was the Six-Day War and why was it significant? In the history of the Israeli-Palestine Israel-Palestine conflict, there was a notable event. Responding to threats from Egypt, Israel declared war and finished the war in just 6 days. The results of war: Israel captured Gaza, the West Bank, and Golan Heights. Through a UN resolution, Israel agreed to hand their territories back to the Philistines, the Palestinians, but Israel retained military administration over those regions to ensure the right to live in peace within safe and secure boundaries. The Six-Day War placed Israel on a secure footing of rightfully owning and controlling the land and minimized Palestine's claim of any significant ownership. Question 12. What happened in 1973 with the Yom Kippur War, and what role did it play? Hoping to catch Israel forces on guard during a high holy day, Egypt and Syria staged a coordinated attack. Syria had especially hoped they could reclaim the Golan Heights, but within 2 weeks, the war was ceased with another UN resolution. The Syrians were unsuccessful. Once again, Israel prevailed. This same scenario has taken place over and over since that time. Peace treaty after peace treaty is agreed upon between Israel and Arab Palestinian authorities, each time Israel gaining strength and deepening their hold on the land. And I think back of all that, and as I watched, and we watched all that, you probably agreed too. The Palestinians, the Arabs would attack, rocket. They were getting their weapons from Iran and from Russia. So as soon as they ran out of weapons, they couldn't fight anymore. Okay, we'll have peace. We'll agree to peace. Okay. So Israel, of course, honored that. And of course, 3 months later, after Iran and Russia equipped them with their weapons, boom. Now they start blowing again. That went on and on for how many years? As we watched that. Next, why has moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem in 2018 so significant for Israel, but another offensive act towards Palestine? After decades of presidential promises to recognize Jerusalem as the ancient and true capital of the state of Israel never occurred. In 2018, Trump finally moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Remember, originally Jerusalem was neutral land, but even that strategic city was put into Jewish control. When the U.S. government moved its embassy there, it was acknowledging the Old Testament claim of Jewish rights in the land. Many other nations followed the U.S. and bolstered Israel's hold on the land. 14, what is the reason for this recent attack by Hamas? In one sense, it is the same reason why they have always been attacked by the Arab people upon the Jews: the rejection of Ishmael and the bitter jealousy in their hearts. Yet, there are some extenuating circumstances that have precipitated this recent aggression. After the moving of the embassy, a liberal and anti-Jewish sentiment within the Israeli government began working against the pro-Israel Netanyahu administration. First step was removal of Netanyahu from the prime minister position through political corruption and false allegations. The new prime minister took a more appeasement approach to dealing with the Palestinians. Also, the U.S. policy towards Israel began to creep backward. Biden's foreign policy loosened sanctions on Iran, the facilitator of global terrorism, and declared enemy of Israel, and walked away from the Abraham Accords. Another factor was globalist economic strategy to begin to bring about the Great Reset had to allow economic collapse of the West and their allies. Then Netanyahu joined with Orthodox religious Jews and regained the prime minister role. His effective leadership began to even make historical gains in talks with Saudi Arabia. All of this angered Palestine and worried of Israel regaining confidence. Finally, U.S. weakness in Afghanistan and its vulnerability being distracted with Ukraine made it a perfect time to attack Israel. Question 15. How have Christians hurt and helped Israel in the conflict? Historically, those Christians that hold to a literal view of the Bible have supported Israel and believe that God has a special place for Israel in the future. Even though many Jews living in the land today are not religious or spiritually minded Jews, Christians believe Israel has a special place in God's promises for the world. However, as mentioned earlier, some Christians misinterpreted the scriptures and have moved Israel out of God's future plans and replaced them with Christianity, the church. This gave way. The church there, I should not correct that because most of the church, we see the word, is a gathering and it's not Christian. 90% of them are not, yet they call them churches. This gave way and legitimized much of the anti-Semitism in the world. The Catholic Church believes in replacement theology. The Lutheran Church believes in replacement theology. 90% of the churches that are organized believe in replacement theology. That is why it has been monumental when a pope would visit the Holy Land. Their visits were not to support Israel's right to the land, but just to acknowledge its place in Christian history. Verse 16, or question 16. How should the United States approach this conflict both militarily and politically? The fact is, whenever the Arab Palestinian people attacked Israel, they have dealt with the problem on their own. They have never needed the U.S. military to assist them. However, the rest of the world understands that Israel is the United States' most beloved ally. That must never be in doubt. The U.S. must never support any nations that threaten the safety of Israel or make overtures to totally eliminate the Jewish state. We need clear and resolved support for Israel, forever remembering what Truman understood. If we bless Israel, we will be blessed. Question 17. How should Israel deal with this conflict? They will deal with it as they have always responded. First, Israel does not provoke war. When threatened or attacked, it responds, and so they are with this recent conflict. Secondly, they must totally eradicate the terrorist cancer within Gaza and any other area within the borders of the land. Obviously, we hate to see any loss of innocent lives or the collateral loss of peaceful Palestinians, which will happen as war progresses. However, Israel historically has warned those who could be innocent of their plans and intentions. The problem is historically the terrorists will use the innocent people as human shields, and they will sacrifice their own people for their evil acts. And finally, as Israel takes steps to achieve a peaceful and safe land, they again will be criticized by the world. This has been the pattern. As in the past centuries, the world's jealousy and covetousness towards God's chosen people will be on display as Israel defends itself. And question 18, where does this ultimately go and what will the future look like? Believing what the Bible says, this conflict will continue and intensify. Israel will prevail, and there will be a moment when it looks like Israel is fully claiming the land, even rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. This time will be known as the tribulation, and the church will be supernaturally removed from the earth. Israel will again be God's primary representation, and they will face excruciating persecution. Prophetically speaking, 2/3 of all Jews will be eliminated. The 1/3 remnant will prevail. Christ will return, and Jerusalem will again be the centerpiece of God's kingdom. Amidst much suffering, there will come a glorious result, and Israel will be in the middle of it all. So there's the notes. And I didn't time it. We're only 36 minutes into our class, and I've got another whole thing I call "We're Getting Closer and Closer," and I want to talk about that. For those of you on Zoom with us, you can listen to the conversation I don't have it as part of the Zoom meeting, but, well, I can pull it up. Let me go ahead. Let me get some of that with me, just pass it down first. Need some of that with you and pass it down. Well, right from these on the back. Okay. And let me pull the screen up. I didn't know if I was gonna get into this. This is what I was gonna do Tuesday night at Brian's house. But we'll get started with it today and we'll finish it up Tuesday night. So let me open up my Word file here. Let's see. And for those of you on Zoom, hang in there. We'll get this. I'll get it up here in a minute. There we go. Um, okay, here we go. Okay, there's for my screen. And now over here. Um, Need to come over here. Zoom in. Here we go. A new share. And we'll get this up there. That way they can be with us. No, I'll do that. Okay, here we go. Everyone, today's the best day of the rest of your life. Tomorrow's going to be worse than today. And we're getting one day closer to the rapture and we're all out of here. And as we look at what's going on in the world today, it's evident we are getting real close. As of 2025, let me get back over here. As of 2025, there are approximately 2.26 billion Christians worldwide. Let me change my width here. I'm running out of space. A little bit more. Okay. Okay, 2.26 billion Christians worldwide, making up nearly 1/3 of the global population. Christianity is the largest religion in the world. with the Catholic Church being the largest denomination. As of 2025, the total number of Catholics worldwide is approximately 1.406 billion. This figure reflects a growth of 1.15% from the previous year. Guess who's going to Catholicism? Non-Catholic Protestants who aren't getting the truth. And they're going to Catholic Church. A lot of them. Christendom. If you've watched my teaching at any time in the past, you should recognize this circle I have drawn here. I call it Christendom, and in this circle, there are 23 different groups that call themselves, identify as Christian. Okay? Catholic is there, as you see, in 2025, 1.406 billion. That's over 55% of all Christians. So when you see on TV, when you hear Fox News, all of them want to talk about God now and all this stuff. They're so excited about their Christianity. They're Catholic. 90% of Fox News is Catholic. When they talk about God, that's the reference they speak from. It's Catholicism. Not all, but many. Right? And so when we look at this diagram, there's not one single group identified here that we can really claim is a Christian organization. Because most of them, if not all of them, have some sort of works added to salvation. Walk an aisle, baptism, speak in tongues. All of that they determine is evidence of your salvation. So I believe that over 90% of the people in all these groups, and there's what? Thousands of organizations now. I forget, 6,000 around the world that claim to be Christian. And in fact, I believe over 90% of them are not truly born again. I tell people, you just sitting in church doesn't make you a Christian. Just like sitting in McDonald's all day long doesn't make you a hamburger. Right? Daniel chapter 2. Let's do a little history study here. I'm not sure how far we'll get, but we'll keep going till it's time. Daniel chapter 1. King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Chapter 2 begins by telling us that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, and that those dreams troubled him to the point of sleeplessness. In verses 2 through 13, we read that Nebuchadnezzar concealed his dreams, commanded his staff of magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to not only tell him what his dreams meant, but to tell him what the dreams were. Nebuchadnezzar knew that if he told them what the dreams were, they would devise some sort of interpretation regardless of whether it was correct or not. Thus, Nebuchadnezzar insisted that they tell him the dreams as well as what they meant. This, of course, was humanly impossible, so the king commanded that all of them, his magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans, and their families, be killed. In verses 14 through 23, God reveals the dream and its meaning to Daniel. In verses 24 through 30, Daniel goes to the king telling him that what he has asked is humanly impossible, but God in heaven has revealed to him what the dream is and what it means. In verses 31 through 35, Daniel tells the king his dream. He says, "O you, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, and its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until the stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found, but the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now that was him telling the dream. Then, beginning in verse 36 through 45, we have the interpretation. This is a dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them. You are the head of gold. And that represents the Babylonian Chaldean Empire that went from 626 BC to 539 BC. He goes on, after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. That's symbolized by the chest and arms of silver, represents the Medo-Persian Empire, which existed from 539 BC to 331 BC. Then another third kingdom of bronze, symbolized by the belly and thighs of bronze, representing the Greek Macedonian Empire from 331 BC to 63 BC. He goes on, which will rule over the earth. Then we come to verse 36 through 39. At that point, right there in the statue, all that has been historical in the sense that since the time that Daniel interpreted the dream, these things have taken place. The remaining verses are dealing with events that to this day have not yet occurred. Verses 40 through 45 are looking into the tribulation. As we go to verse 40, then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, symbolized by the legs of iron and the feet and toes, iron and clay mixed. Inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not adhere or combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that's representing the kingdom of Christ. And that kingdom will not be left for another. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone representing the kingdom of Jesus Christ was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so that the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So in these passages, we see a picture of the Gentile rule over Israel from the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, 626 BC, until Jesus Christ returns at the second advent to establish his millennial kingdom. Years ago, I was taught, and I taught, that the legs of iron represented the Roman Empire, and the feet and toes of iron of clay and clay represented the revived Roman Empire. That was wrong. That was an error in interpretation. When I came to realize, and I wasn't the first one, there have been others, but when I came to realize that God had a separate plan for Israel, was totally separate and apart from his plan for Christianity. Two totally separate plans. And when I consider that, the Roman Empire began in 63 BC and existed until 476 AD. Since both Israel and their laws and Christianity existed together over a period of 40 years, interpreting the legs of iron being the Roman Empire is not correct, because we would have fallen under the Roman Empire. as Christians. Okay? So it wasn't a correct interpretation. There will be a kingdom yet future that will rule over Israel between the rapture and the second advent. And today, that kingdom is Israel. It is not Israel, Islam, the Muslims. The Muslims will be that kingdom. Islam will be that kingdom that will rule over Israel during the tribulation period. Okay. And so we were interpreting it incorrectly, saying that the legs of iron were the Roman Empire and the feet and toes were the revived Roman Empire. And we tried to define that. Well, that was the United Nations. No, that failed. Well, that was the Western European Union. Well, that failed too. But those were all areas that we tried to teach about that revived Roman Empire. Now, when you look at the Roman Empire of yesterday, the Roman Empire when Israel existed on the land, that we looked at all that history, all that land from Spain all the way to Great Britain and beyond, to Netherlands, was all part of the Roman Empire. And many of those nations that were part of that Roman Empire were Muslim nations. So when the Antichrist steps forward, and we're going to talk about that later in all of this presenting, won't get it done today, but we'll get there if you come Tuesday night. And if you can't come, just log into the TV. We'll have it on Zoom. But when it comes that when that guy steps forward, that Muslim, that Antichrist, he will be from the revived Roman Empire, because that whole area was part of the Roman Empire at that time. And so this whole concept that we taught, and I taught for years, of the revived Roman Empire was not correct. Now, anytime anybody wants to ask a question, you certainly may with me. I'm open. Let's move on. Chapter 7 of Daniel. I forgot. It's not chapter 71, it's chapter 7. I got 71 on my screen. So, chapter 2 of the book of Daniel was the first of two prophetic outlets of the Gentile empires, which would rule over Israel, called in Scripture the times of the Gentiles. Chapter 2 is the view of the course of world empires from man's perspective, while here in chapter 7, we see a second prophetic outline of the same period as viewed from the divine viewpoint. The Scriptures reveal that from the time of Daniel until the time when Jerusalem shall be given freedom from Gentile dominion at the second advent of Christ, there will be four great empires which will rise and fall. In chapter 2, we saw those four empires as an attractive, glorious image. In chapter 7, they are seen as four wild, voracious beasts which devour and destroy all before them, and are therefore worthy of judgment. The first beast we find in Daniel 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. The first beast, as did the golden head in the image of chapter 2, represents the Babylonian Empire, 626 BC to 539 BC. In the beginning, that Babylonian Empire was strong and powerful like a lion, but it lost its strength. Even though it had a man's heart, it was still a beast. The second beast, Daniel chapter 7, verse 5. And behold, another beast, the second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. The bear stands for the Medo-Persian Empire, 539 BC to 331 BC, as did the chest and arms of silver of the image in chapter 2. Being raised up on one side signified the Persian element was stronger than the Medes. The bear had 3 ribs in its mouth because Susiana, Lydia, and Asia Minor had been conquered by this power. The third beast, Daniel 7, verse 6. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. The leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads is the picture of the Greco-Macedonian Empire, which existed from 331 BC to 63 BC, corresponding to the thighs of brass and the image of chapter 2 in the image. The empire's swiftness was represented by the 4 wings, and the 4 heads represented the partition of the empire into the kingdoms of Syria, Egypt, Macedonia, and Asia Minor. The fourth beast, Daniel 7, 7 to 8. After this I kept looking in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, the horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Now, the error of interpretation also applies here regarding the interpretation of the fourth beast. Just as in the prophecy of chapter 2, the final form of Gentile form is to exist in a union of 10 kings, and their kingdoms represented by the 10 horns. From among those 10 kingdoms will come one individual who will have control over the whole dominion of the 10 kings. 3 of the kings are overthrown as this one individual is gaining his authority. This final authority over the empire is wielded by one who is marked by blasphemy, hatred of God's people, disregard for established law and order, who will continue for 3.5 years. Daniel 7, 24 to 25. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom of 10 horns will arise, and another will arise after them. And he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. And he will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. The fourth beast of Daniel's vision is the same beast about which John writes in Revelation 13.
Daryl,
Yes.
did I hear you say that when the rapture happens, that the Antichrist is going to be a Muslim?
Yeah.
You know, there are people, pastors out on YouTube now that says the rapture happens during our period of time, that Donald Trump.
Well, I know they think that. I know they think. Oh, I know. I agree with you, Dwayne. Absolutely, absolutely. When I look at some of the things he says, when he walks up and says, "Well, I have now established peace throughout the Middle East." Well, we know that's garbage. That's not true. And of course, he's exercising a lot more than any president before him has ever done so. But no, is he the Antichrist? No, he's not.
During the tribulation, going to accept a Muslim as the Antichrist.
Oh, well, the Jews won't. The Jews will be persecuted throughout that. The Jews aren't going to accept it, but the Muslim nations will. And they're, through that tribulation, the ones who are persecuted and God is judging is Israel. They're gonna suffer. That's God's time. That's Israel's final the 70th week, and Israel is going to be persecuted through that whole time. They're not going to believe that he's the Christ, right? But the Muslim nations will be, and the so-called Christians who are not truly Christian, who aren't raptured, they'll believe that he's the one that's going to solve all the problems. Okay? Yeah, I believe that, and in fact, we're going to talk about Mamdani. Probably won't get to it today yet. We'll see. But anyway, because that's another thing I received. But Revelation 13, 1-9 is that the fourth beast in Daniel's vision is the same beast that John writes about. And we'll not go through all 9 of those verses. They're in your notes. So down to the final form of world power will have worldwide influence. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. Remember, again, about the Jewish issue. There's a lot of Jews who are not going to become believers. I mean, the Jews who will become believers, the 144,000, they'll go around the whole time with that, trying to get non-believing Jews to believe that this Jesus has already come. Not coming, but the historic Jesus is the one who paid for their sins and so on. And he's the one they're going to have to believe in. So there's going to be all sorts of evangelism going on. And God's going to convict 144,000 Jews, 12,000 from each tribe, that the historic Jesus was in fact their Messiah. And they'll believe, and they'll spread that gospel throughout that period of time. But yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm listening to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Politics, in terms of, are these Jews that aren't believing during tribulation, they still expecting a warrior Messiah, or expecting this Jesus or this Messiah to come to be a warrior, to liberate them from under all this?
Oh yeah, the Jews still today are looking forward to their Messiah coming. All right. And so when we get into Islam, I've got that all part of this. All right. The Mahdi that is in the Quran, that's going to be the Antichrist. All right. I've got information coming on that. I'll provide all that for you, but it's part of this. And I tell you what, it's getting big. That's why I say it's closer and closer. All they got to do, and Trump's trying to play his role, Satan's role in deceiving everybody and making all the decisions that he's making. They claim he's a Christian, but that's like the 90% who attend our churches claim to be Christian, and they're not truly. So no, but I know, Dwayne, I agree. There's many pastors standing in churches today that are saying that Trump's our Antichrist, and what they don't realize is before the Antichrist comes, we're not going to be here. We're not going to be here to see who it is. That's why it's not Donald Trump, because we're still here. Okay? And it's not Mamdani. But when you understand the 12ers and what Islam teaches, I've got all that. What time is 11:03? Well, let's keep going. I'll keep going as long. We'll stop about 11:15, and we got a few minutes yet. So let's continue with what I got. But if you can't make it to Brian's house Tuesday night, where I finish this, we'll put it up on Zoom, so you'll be able to get it on Zoom. And at Brian's house, I'll try to do it on Facebook also. The final form of the world power will have worldwide influence. The fourth beast, Daniel 7:23. The fourth beast will have a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. The final verses, we do see that this world power will be destroyed by the return of Jesus Christ and in the second advent. Daniel 7:22, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Verses 26 and 27, but the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Placing Daniel's vision. Now we come back to the statue. If we place Daniel's vision in chapter 7 alongside Daniel's interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we see the first beast, the lion, as did the golden head, the image in chapter 2. In chapter 2 represents the Babylonian Empire. The bear represents the Medo-Persian Empire, as did the chest and arms of silver on the image of chapter 2. The leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads is the picture of the Greco-Macedonian Empire, corresponding to the thigh of brass and image of chapter 2. And here again, we have the chronological gap between the events that are now part of history and events yet future. The dreadful, terrible beast, the last days empire, will arise sometime after the rapture of the body of Christ and before the establishment of the kingdom of Christ on earth. That's the period after the rapture, before Christ returns, corresponding to the legs of iron and the feet of mixed of clay.
Daryl,
Yes,
you think we're the rapture generation?
I do. I believe in since probably for the last 40 years, believing that the rapture is going to take place before I die. And I could be wrong, but I live each day. Am I going to say it's going to happen? No, that's a fool. I can't say that. But do I believe? Yeah, I believe we're all going to be together, and it could happen any moment. I think about that when I'm driving down the road. I said, well, Lord, if it's going to happen, now's a good time because there's no other vehicles around. But no, I've been believing, I won't stand up and say, yes, it's going to happen next month or whatever. I've read all the stuff that all the different pastors, for those of you who've been to Davao City, I don't know if you remember Apollo C. Keeble, it's a big place next to the airport out there. Well, in 1998, I went over there and I watched them build that huge thing next to the airport, and up it went, and he was preaching to everybody that Jesus was coming back in 2000. And he was selling lots out in the eastern side of Mindanao. You come out and here's your plot. You can watch Jesus come from the east as he comes. And they were spending money and all this sort of stuff. And of course, 2000 came and went, and he had to go into hiding. And he hid for about 3-4 years, and the whole place became nothing, a shell of nothing. And then a few years later, his brother shows up, and now Apollo C. Keeble comes back claiming he's the Gentile Jesus because the Jewish Jesus failed. And it's all built up again.
Define the Jews previous of 1948 and the Jews that are here in the age of grace today, which I've heard as Messianic Jews. Can you define those or separate?
Well, a messianic Jew is someone who believes that Jesus was the Messiah. But that doesn't mean that they're Christian. Okay? Believing that Jesus is the Messiah, the Jews are still looking for the Messiah. So if they believe that historic Jesus was their Messiah, well, I have to ask them, well, what do you believe about that historic Jesus? Because just believing that he was the Messiah doesn't save anybody today.
Today.
Yeah.
To
You know,
our gospel message.
You've got to, that's not the legitimate gospel message today. So it doesn't save anybody. We can call them a Messianic Jew, but you have to ask them, what is it that you truly believe about that Jesus? And if they can't tell you that he went to the cross, paid the penalty for my sins, and was buried and rose again 3 days later, they're not saved. right? They're not saved at all. And I remember Auntie Rose Morell was working and some Messianic Jews came into her office trying to save her. And so she invited them to my class. They came to my class one night, and for the whole time I taught salvation from the Old Testament. I used their Old Testament stuff that points to this Jesus as being the one. So anyway, this is a place to stop, but we finished this part. You've got more in your notes, but yeah, go ahead. Yep.
What you what you say today here and all, do you believe also that America will fall before the rapture?
No,
No.
I don't believe America will fall before the man. But I believe America is going in that direction. I believe that people have us out of here before it goes that bad. But when we can't get together like this, we have to be persecuted like Israel are. I don't know if that's even close to happening yet, Marshall. We still got a lot of airways, still a lot of, but when you consider 90%, maybe I have to go back and eat. Don't make it 90. Most of the churches that are gathering right now today. All right, and I don't know, you go to a different church, if some of you may go to a different church, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, most of the preachers standing in pulpits today are serving Satan. Been to Bible school, been to seminary, but they are serving Satan because they're not teaching truth. I have a friend talked to me just the other day. They go to church. Yeah, well, he's really good. He's getting through the Old Testament. What are you doing? No, I'm on a Christian life, the Old Testament. I don't mind teaching it. I don't mind talking about historically like we did before. The fact of the matter is, we just need to understand the past to know where we are today. But no, I believe America is going to take the words in America. No doubt about it. But I believe that. But and with that, I need to remind us all, our responsibility here is to be ambassadors. Not to impress on people how much we know, not to be able to teach step 1, step 2, step 3, step 5, but talk about Jesus Christ and ask them, where are you going when you die? If you die today, where would you go? And then after the answer, are you sure you're right? What makes you so sure? They need to know. They need to know. That's, to me, when I look at the condition of the world today, I see a failed Christianity. I see a failed Christianity. Realizing, however, that we're talking about 2.4 Catholics. All the Christian. Not.
But with the confidence that this is all a part of God's plan.
Oh, sure.
Which gives us all hope, looking and being prepared as an ambassador to see the Lord come back and we'll be out of here face to face with him.
And I just, who was it? David Jeremiah, and it's written a book about heaven. I don't know if you see it advertised on TV. And his response is, I didn't write the book so I can teach you all about heaven and what it's like. I want to know that you're gonna be there. That's what I want. And I want to be sure that you're with me when we go to heaven. So I don't agree with David Jeremiah and a lot of the ways in your book, but I agree with that. So let's encourage each other. Let's be mindful of that. We have opportunity. We see people, we visit with people, and I know. And Dr. Jim, everywhere he went. He had, even better than any time. What do you? He talks right to the waitresses, waiters. Wait for Dean, whatever. Might be. Let's do it. That's right. Father, thank you for this time together. I thank you that you continue to give us life. I pray that as we fed on your word, the Holy Spirit will take that word and lead us and guide us and direct us as we continue to grow more and more like our Lord and Savior. Use us, Father, glorify yourself in our lives. Thank you in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Gerald.
Yes.
As dad would always do.
Oh, I-
picture.
Yeah.
Big now, though.
Yeah, I think you take some and I'll take a few more. I forget about all that stuff. But you've got one of those fancy iPhones, I wouldn't know which button to push. Here we go. All right. Camera time. Yeah, all right. Once, now I'm gonna take a couple of them. And we're just gonna move on over here. And move on over here. And move on back here. There we go. All right. All right, I think it's about ready. We go back. It's all from here, we're gonna go down to.
Where?
Down the hot spring.
I mean, I'm.
Thursday. We're down. Enjoy your day. Yeah. Enjoy life. All right. Okay, we're gonna shut her down.
Parliament.